Welcome to Reading Under the Covers, a romance novel podcast. I'm Francesca from Under the Covers book blog, and today I am excited to bring you guys another book recommendation list. And this time is a particular trope, very niche trope that came up in conversation when I was talking a few episodes back with Angela from PNR Book Lover Reviews. We kind of did a talk about the evolution of a romance reader and what we used to really love to read and what our tastes have changed. Things that we said we thought we would never pick up now are things that are basically staples in what we're reading, but also the things that haven't changed or that we keep going back to. One of those, obviously, for the two of us, being paranormal stories. And one in particular that she was saying she was always on the lookout for more is paranormal or fantasy arranged marriages. So I decided to pick out a few that I think are really good, and I've got some recommendations here today for you guys that involve paranormal and fantasy arranged marriages. Not to be confused with marriage of convenience. I've seen a ton of lists where the two get intermixed, and there is a difference between a marriage of convenience necessarily and an arranged marriage, where let's say it's a little bit less choice on the part of our heroine usually. And I'm going to talk about a few here on the podcast that I think that you guys should be looking at and adding to your TBR, but I also have more on the blog on a full list that we put together for the blog, so I'll be sure to leave the link to that blog post in the show notes down below, so go there and check it out for even more paranormal and fantasy arranged marriage recommendations. The first one is a standalone paranormal, and it's Court of the Vampire Queen by Katie Robert. I should also mention that Court of the Vampire Queen is the compilation of the Bloodline Vampires trilogy. So this was originally released as 3 stories: Sacrifice, Heir, and Queen. If you have read those, then you've already read Court of the Vampire Queen. And it does feature a polyamorous relationship. Our heroine is half human and half vampire, and all she's ever wanted is to escape her father's control. She's lived her whole life between the two worlds, but never really experiencing either. She really hasn't experienced being a full human or a full vampire until her father chooses to use her as a political pawn and gifts her to a darkly powerful and dangerous vampire. This is Malachi. He's a vampire that you should not mess with. He rules his vampires with an iron fist and has a shady reputation, but the more she spends time with him, she realizes that she doesn't really have anything to fear, and he's not the monster that she first thought. And that fear then turns into lust and trust and then something more as he slowly opens her world to things that she never even considered that could be hers. That also includes her having the love of Malachi's 2 closest friends and companions. So she gets to have 3 powerful and dangerous vampire men all to herself. And while adjusting to this new life and this new and seductive world, she slowly realizes that she may have the power to face down her father and take back control of her life and the crown as well, which by all rights should be hers. This is definitely an erotic one, so be prepared for that. It's super steamy and spicy, and it does deal with vampire royalty and politics, but also those concepts of exploring the heroine blossoming into herself and finding herself, not only sexually, but also her footing in the world. The next one that I'm going to recommend is one that I would say straddles a little bit the line between just an epic fantasy with a little bit of romantic elements. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's a romantasy, but you do get romance in it. And that is War Prize by Elizabeth Vaughn. This is one that Suzanne has recommended multiple times here on the podcast, and you've also seen it definitely on the blog. And it's the first book in the Chronicles of the Warlands series. Our heroine is the daughter of a warrior king. She's also a trained healer. Her father is dead now, and her incompetent half-brother is the one on the throne. The kingdom is in danger, and she's basically serving her people by healing the warriors on the battlefield. She also finds herself learning the customs and the language of her enemies and taking care of them with all of her attention and compassion. And to save her land and her people, she ends up trading her freedom to become the War Prize. If you're a fan of barbarian romance and like Conan and those types of adventures, then you definitely want to check out this epic fantasy. It's a great story where you're also going to be exploring these mysterious cultures, and you also get that romance with a truly heroic hero. He's the mysterious Firelander warlord who basically demands her in exchange for a ceasefire. Now, the next book is probably a classic when it comes to fantasy romance and monster romance. It is one we're always recommending, but I also see a ton of people recommending it. So I'm sure you've heard of it, but it bears repeating as well because it is such a great book. And that is Radiance by Grace Draven. This is the first book in the Wraith Kings series. And I think it's also a great introduction to monster romance if you want a hero that is still quite human looking, but he does have different color skin. Our hero is the Prince of the Kai, and he has lived basically as the non-essential spare heir to the throne. So when it comes time for a trade and political alliance between the human kingdom and the Kai kingdom, he has to marry a Gauri woman, which are the humans, in order to seal that treaty. Our heroine is the niece of the king of the human kingdom, and she's always known that the royal family only saw her as how they could marry her off strategically. So she's always been resigned to that fate. But then she's completely horrified to discover that she's not just marrying some foreign aristocrat, but the younger prince of a people that are not human and not familiar. This is also a great story about the concept of perceived beauty, because both of them see the other as ugly just because they are foreign and not familiar in the way that they look. But they are very much so destined to be together and they're made for each other. And they have to fight duty and politics as they are in the middle of this hostile kingdom scheme that is determined to tear them apart. I really think that this was such a great exploration of a medieval fantasy universe. It has all of the things that I love about the political intrigue in a fantasy romance. And I think that the author handled with such grace the topic of true beauty. And it is more about true love, not insta love built on looks, but really on partnership and mutual respect, dealing with the fear of the other and overcoming the physical differences. This is just such a beautiful story, and if you haven't read it yet, it is what I would consider a must read if you're a fan of romantasy or fantasy romance, so add that to your TBR for sure. The next one that I have is A Fate of Wrath and Flame by K.A. Tucker. This is the first book in the Fate of Wrath and Flame series, and in this one we do have a time travel political intrigue romantasy. The series is now complete in September, and it does have 4 books, so if you want to binge through and read all 4, you can, but it does continue throughout the series. So you don't get a resolution at the end of the first book. The heroine of the series is a human living in New York City, and she is a thief. She's been working for a crime boss in New York City, stealing jewels. And then a woman comes to secure her services at Sword Point, and she is transported into this other realm. There's opposing thrones, and there's warring elves, elemental magic, and all of these things that she just cannot understand. Her job is to basically steal a stone from a sacred garden without anyone discovering her true identity, except she finds that she's in the body of a captured princess, an enemy of the kingdom that she's in and where she's supposed to steal this stone after she had poisoned the beloved king and queen on the day that she was supposed to marry the prince. Her betrothed, who is now the new crowned king, obviously hates her, and he's giving her 2 choices. One is to live her life in a cell, or an acquittal of all charges if she gives out information and exposes the plot against him. This is a slower paced story, but it's definitely a great one, and it has so much political intrigue, so if you're a fan of that, you'll definitely love this story. I always love stories like that, and I also think that it lends itself really well for a slower pace, and especially because there are so many different identities that we have to peel layers off in this story that it makes complete sense that you would take your time and explore all these things with our heroine herself, because she has to figure out her own identity of the body that she's in and how to save herself and the king. It also has all the tropey goodness that you can want. It does have obviously that slow burn, but also enemies to lovers, political games, rival thrones, gods and monsters, prophecies, a very unique magic system, multiple realms, mistaken identities, and witty bodyguards. In my opinion, this is a classic fantasy romance that you should be checking out. The next book is Concert of Fire by Kit Rocha. This is book 1 in the Bound to Fire and Steel series, and if you've been around Under the Covers covers for any length of time, you probably already know that we love Kit Rosha around here. And when you're looking for some steamy, erotic paranormal, then this is going to be your go-to. The hero of this story is an ancient dragon god, and he's been protecting the borders of the sheltered lands for 3,000 years. And in return, he's only had one demand, that every 100 years, one mortal ruler must send their heir to serve as his consort, as long as they can survive. So it comes time to send a consort, and Sachiel is the one that is going to be the 31st consort that is sacrificed to the monster. She's young and she's beautiful, but she also has a few secrets. The first one is that she is actually a disposable orphan, but she's been trained in the art of seduction. The second is her handmaid, Sanya, is an assassin and the only person that she's ever truly loved. And the third is that she's cursed. So Sashi and Zanya have 5 weeks to murder the dragon in his bed, and if they fail, the mortal king's curse will basically kill her and steal her soul. Except that once they reach there, they find out things are not exactly what they thought they were, and the dragon is very different than what they've been told. So now, of course, they have to figure out how to beat this curse. If you're looking for a romantasy with a dragon, especially one where it's a polyamorous relationship, then this is also going to be the one for you. But it's also an epic erotic romance as well. It has life or death stakes, great plot and character development, and world building, which Kit Rosha is always so good at. You're gonna get a story that is mix of history and the curse and murder and political intrigue, but at the same time it's a firestorm of spice, and I'm always partial to reading a good dragon story, so if you're on the lookout for that, then check this one out for sure. Up next we have King of Battle and Blood by Scarlett St. Clair. This is the first book in the Adrian and Isolde series. So Isolde has always thought that her wedding day would be her death day, and to end a years-long war, she has to marry the vampire king Adrian, and she actually has to kill him. That assassination attempt is thwarted, and Adrian threatens that if Isolde tries to kill him again, he will personally raise her as an undead. She's been raised to hate vampires, so that is the biggest threat that she can have because she doesn't want to become the thing that she hates the most. She has to find other ways to defy him while at the same time surviving the brutal vampire court. Of course, then there's the undeniable and explosive chemistry between them, but at the same time she starts to discover maybe the truth about exactly why the vampire king had chosen her to be his consort, and the reality and the truth about everything she's known her whole life that drove her to be a pawn in that assassination scheme to save her kingdom. If you're a fan of the touch her and die trope, then this one is your next read for sure. I think also Scarlett St. Clair is so good at delivering a very spicy read, but it has such great world building. There is so much amazing political intrigue in this story, and I love how we're really discovering that backstory of both characters and their kingdoms as well. And it's also a story that continues into book 2, so you want to make sure that you also read that as well. And the last book that I have for you guys on this list is one that I actually recently finished, and it had been on my TBR forever, and it's actually Bride of the Shadow King by Sylvia Mercedes. Is the first book in the Bride of the Shadow King series. The heroine is basically a shunned princess. She had been arranged to marry this prince, and on the day of the wedding she ends up throwing up all over him and it doesn't go through, and it's just such a bad mark on their kingdom. She's seen as this princess with an illness, and they shun her away from the court and kept out of sight. She's then finally brought back to court when her younger sister has been arranged to be married to the Shadow King, which is a much needed alliance between her kingdom and theirs, and they're basically seen as trolls. Her sister obviously doesn't want to get married, and when the Shadow King comes to meet his new bride, he can't help but be fascinated by her older sister, but he knows that he must follow through and do what's right for his people. Except when the sister that is supposed to be marrying him is traveling back to his kingdom, wars are breaking out and she ends up getting killed. So our heroine's father decides to use some magic and make our heroine look like her sister so they don't have to break the pact and continue on with the alliance. I love that this is not the straightforward arranged marriage that I was thinking, and it's more about this human princess bride that is taking the place of her younger sister in this arranged marriage, but at the same time she was already fascinated by the Shadow King that she's going to marry, and she's also conflicted about having to lie to him. And he was just as enamored with her, and he thinks that he's having to go through with this marriage to the younger sister while being in love with the older sister and having her in his head. This also has plenty of political intrigue and wars and all of that as well. It was a super fast and easy read. It is a slow burn romance, and it does set up the series quite well. It is a series that you're going to have to read all the books in the series. So far, there are 3 books. I don't know if it's a finished trilogy or if there's going to be more coming out, but I am so excited to dive into book 2 for sure very soon. And at least in this first book, I would say that this is one, it's going to be more on the sweeter side. So if you want something different than some of the erotic ones that we already mentioned on this list, then this might be a good fit for you. And that's it. That's all the books that I have for this list today. Hopefully you guys found something that you haven't seen before and that sparks your mood to try it out. I would love to hear from you guys. Please let me know which ones are your favorite paranormal or fantasy arranged marriage love stories. You can always send us your recommendations via a voice note. I will leave a link in the show notes down below of how you can do that. Just let us know what's the book, author, and why you recommend it, and you may just find yourself right here on the Reading Under the Covers podcast. I will also leave a link in the show notes down below to the blog post where we have even more recommendations with this micro-trope. And as you know, you can always find all of our book recommendations on the blog at underthecoversbookblog.com. So be sure to also be subscribed to our newsletter. Will be in your inbox every single Sunday with all of the latest bookish news and recommendations. You can also find us on social media at UTC Book Blog on Instagram, TikTok, X, and Pinterest, and Under the Covers Book Blog on Facebook and YouTube. Or catch us every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our Novel Nights live show where we do book recommendations and bookish news. That's all I have for you guys today. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you again in the next one. Bye!